Good morning to each one. It's 9 a.m., so it's time for us to get started in our Bible study. If you'll have your Bibles open, please, to the book of Genesis, chapter 31. I'm filling in for Mr. Todd Forrest, who's away this morning. Genesis chapter 31. Now, the Bible says, do unto others as you would have done unto you, and Todd didn't do that for me. He left me like 6 questions from the last week, and I got to cover all that and cover this week's class. So, I'm picking on him even though his mom is in the audience and his aunt here, but I already did it. I already rebuked him to his face, so I can do it here as well. I said now on that next lesson, on today's lesson, since I had to cover 6 from last week, I said, give me like 3 or 4. Well, there's like 13 total out of those 7. You know, you get 2 or 3 questions in one. So anyways, we're going to go as quickly as we can for last week and then get as much as we can for lesson 18. So Jacob flees from Laban in just a moment. We're picking up with question 5 from lesson 17. And so we got, as I said, 6 questions here remaining. So just jumping right in from last week. I know some of you weren't here last week, especially those who are visiting with us, but question 5, we asked, what sins does Rachel commit as they flee from her father? So why are they fleeing from her father, which is Laban, first of all? Francis?
Jacob noticed the tension that was starting to appear between the two.
Yeah, the way they left, maybe they could have done it differently, but the most important thing is God said, Jacob, return to your land. We're going to go home. Go back to the land of Canaan. So that's why they're leaving. We got that word fleeing. There wasn't a good relationship, unfortunately, between Jacob and Laban at this time because of what had transpired over the years between them with their business and with their work. But as they're fleeing, Laban's away at this time when they kind of leave under the cover of darkness, so to speak. He eventually catches up because he doesn't have all these herds and he doesn't have all these little ones he's traveling with like Jacob and his household. But what does Rachel steal from her father?
His idols?
Yeah. Okay, what does he have those household items anyway? But right, so Rachel, had stolen the household idols that belonged to her father Laban. And then when eventually Laban and his sons and whoever else he brings with him catches up with Jacob and his household, that's one of the things he brings up, right? You all have stolen my household idols. And Jacob's upset by that. Now, I haven't taken anything that doesn't belong to me. And he said, see if you can find it among us. And he took Jacob up on that offer, which was kind of rude too, as Brother Waldron points out in his material, and goes searching for it. And of course, where is it hidden?
Under Rachel.
Under Rachel, in a saddle or a bag. She's sitting on top of it. And what does she say? Why she can't rise and greet her father?
That time of month.
That time of month. And so I can't get up, and I'm unclean, and so he accepts that. Well, so she stole, and then she lied about it. But just kind of stepping back, what does this imply about the influence that the world has had on Laban's family and perhaps on Rachel since she's taken those things? What does that tell us? Well, she and her family has been corrupted by pagan influences, obviously, right? Was she attracted to the actual gods? Is that why she took them? Was it the value, the materials, the gold, the silver, materials, and that's why they were valuable and she took them? Or did she actually want to bring them to worship them? I mean, we're not told in the text. We're just told she stole the household gods or idols, and I'm sure they had some value beyond just those who would want to bow down to them. Norm?
Well, you see the differences in the family traditions and the culture. They've been separated for a long time from the relatives down in Canaan, and so this is one of those attributes that's being brought out in that they have not been following God's teachings and all of that for all this period of time, even though they're related to each other.
Right. Now remember, Abraham, regarding Isaac, he made his servant swear, remember, don't you find a wife for my son Isaac from the people of Canaan. He made him go back to this area, right? And that's why he has Rebekah. And then Isaac and Rebekah have Jacob and Esau. And Rebekah didn't want Jacob to marry one of those Canaanite women, because remember, Esau already he married 2 Hittite women. They were a grief of mind to mom and dad. And later Esau recognizes that and marries a daughter connected to Ishmael, right? But so that's why Jacob was sent with those influences. And so even though it's not pure, they still have these household gods and idols. There still seems to be some kind of understanding or belief in Jehovah. Maybe it's some mixed there, but we also see the corruption still, leaving Ur of Chaldees to come to Haran, and there's still these household idols that they have. So question 6 asks, how did Israel commit the sin of Rachel when they left Egypt? We got the passage from Amos, which is quoted by Stephen in his sermon in Acts 7, and what's the lesson for us? And so, how long was Israel in Egypt?
430 years.
Yeah, they were there a long time, right? 430 years. A lot of that in bondage of those years, right? And what were the Egyptians, religiously speaking?
Multi.
Pagans, right? I mean, they believed in all kinds of different gods that they worshiped. Did that have any kind of impact or influence on the children of Israel? It did. I mean, they believed in Jehovah. When they were in harsh bondage, the text tells us they cried out to God for deliverance. But we also discover, and maybe not shockingly, if that's been their culture, their environment for centuries down there among the Egyptians and their religion or gods, then that has had an impact upon the children of Israel. In fact, they don't get very far. They get to the Mount Sinai, and Moses has gone a little too long for their liking, and what do? Aaron has bring all your gold jewelry, and he molds and fashions a golden calf, right? They begin to, here's the God that brought you out of Egypt. Here's the God that's going to lead you to the land of Canaan. And so why so quickly turn to that? Why would that even be on their mind if there wasn't already some influence and corruption there, right? And so it specifically mentions these gods. They carried Succoth, your king, and Chiam, your idols, the star of your gods. And looking that up, that's a Mesopotamian star deity. Okay, so worshiping kind of the heavens, and that's referenced many times in the Old Testament, how Israel would get corrupted by that. But they had been influenced by when they left Egypt. And so what's the lesson for us? When we read these Old Testament stories of God's people, and
Well, we can be influenced by the world too, very easily.
yes,
When we get too heavily mixed in with it, you know.
it's always a clear present danger to God's people in any generation, right? Because we live in an ungodly world. We are to be lights in the darkness, and we're to be salt to the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, Jesus says, good for nothing but to be thrown out, trampled underfoot by men, right? So we have to keep our distinctiveness, and if we don't, we begin to blend in and be molded by the world. And Paul says in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, and do not be what? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by what? The renewing of your mind. By this, by the perfect will of God. So, and you see that. You see the worldliness that does influence and corrupt children of God, sometimes in the way that we speak, words that and phrases we shouldn't use, in the way that we dress like the world immodestly, places we go, things we watch, and then there's not that distinctiveness. We just blend in with the world. And so, and that can happen religiously as well. I mean, our beliefs and softening to that which is error and not truth. And so we have to guard against that, don't we? Question 7, how does Jacob describe his service to Laban over 20 years? So if you look at verses 38 through 41, just to give you a pinpoint, especially for those who haven't had this lesson. So that's Genesis 31 in your Bibles. If you're not there, join us there, please. So Genesis 31, verses 38 through 41. What did he say about his 20-year service for Laban? What's he bring up? Normally,
He says he changed his wages 10 times during that period of time. With the shifting goalposts, we were talking about that.
Yeah. And what about all those days and nights? How's he describe them? Were they always easy working for him? I mean, who's suffering? Physically, so often through those many years, those 2 decades, 20 years working for Laban, it was Jacob. And so he says, these 20 years, verse 38, I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young. I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was in the day. The drought consumed me, and the frost by night. My sleep departed from my eyes. I had many sleepless nights through those years. Thus I've been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock. And this is what Norm brought up, and you've changed my wages 10 times. You're just all over the place. I've endured a lot from you and from the elements. And when there was loss, I bore that. You didn't bear that. And so if anyone feels maybe mistreated and misused and underappreciated, it shouldn't be you, Laban. Look what I've gone through. Right? And he probably, I don't know if he'd ever expressed this thing. Maybe he's kind of getting off his chest finally, as he's been confronted by his father-in-law as he fled from him. Not the goodbye you want. I mean, these are his daughters. These are his grandchildren. You can see it from his vantage point. Why'd you just up and leave? You didn't even let me say goodbye. And again, maybe that could have been, and maybe that should have been handled differently, but obviously they had a very strenuous relationship. One of the things, remember we studied last week with Todd, is the way that Laban began to look at Jacob, right? Verse 2 of chapter 31, and Jacob saw the countenance or the attitude, the face of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable to him. As before, we talked about nonverbal communication, the way someone's looking at you, and you're like, okay, they're not too pleased with me anymore. Have you experienced that in a relationship before? Okay, I won't get too personal, but I can think of a relationship where it shifted. And the first thing wasn't because they told me, it was just their body language and the way they were just looking and acting towards me. And I'm like, well, what happened? And it took a while to kind of figure that out because they didn't just come out and say it. But you pick up on it, and Jacob's picking up on it. And right after that, verse 3, the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. And God also, in this communication with Jacob, said, I've seen and observed what Laban's done to you. So God's aware of it. It's not Jacob's just making up this stuff, and it's not true. The Lord's aware of it. And so that's why he's returned. The Lord told him to. The Lord's aware of how Laban's been treating him. Now, whether the Lord said leave while Laban's gone and don't say goodbye, I don't think we have that in the text, do we? But how did God right Laban's wrongs toward Jacob, and how should this affect our faith?
Sam had a
Oh, Sam, I'm sorry. What do you got?
I didn't mean to, I guess, interrupt you, go off on a tangent, but Jacob does describe his service to Laban as honest. That he worked hard and he didn't take from him, and that he did good work. So when you just mentioned that in verse 20, it straight up says that Jacob deceived Laban by not telling him that he was fleeing. That's not condoned, right? Like that's just a description of what he did. That's not necessarily the right choice he should have made.
Right, I think just stated in the text what he did, right? I mean, he's known as a planter, that's his name. It's about to be changed in our study right, from Jacob to Israel, but he's been the supplanter, he's been the deceiver. From the womb, right, he's grabbing his brother's foot, and then we got the birthright story, right, and then we have the blessings and taking that, and then fleeing from his brother. Now he's fleeing from Laban. So it's been kind of a tumultuous life for Jacob from the beginning, the way things have gone, the way things have been handled. Much of it his fault, some of it not. That's beginning with his parents and the favoritism and how they handled all that, and they were not on the same page. But here you're right, pointing out in chapter 31, verse 20, and Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. Could that have been handled better? Yeah. Laban maybe wouldn't have liked it, I'm sure, still at all, because these are my daughters, these are my grandchildren and all that, and feeling like all that wealth now that Jacob has, he feels kind of wronged by that, and I should have all this. But God blessed Jacob with all that. That is brought out in the text, with the dream of the verses 11 and 12. The angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob, and I said, here I am. Lift your eyes now and see all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, gray spotted, for I've seen all that Laban is doing to you. So God's blessed him with all that he has, with the arrangement agreement that he worked out with the speckled and spotted and streaked and all that. That's God's hand in that, and blessing Jacob with that. But again, Jacob has free will. He doesn't have to be making I guess the relationship even worse, right? The way he left. And if he had left and Laban pushed against it, God's told me to leave, right? And that's the truth. The Lord told me to return to my homeland. And that's what I must do. I have to be obedient to the Lord. Kind of like the servant of Abraham when they tried to delay him with leaving with Rebekah. Well, the Lord's with me. Don't interrupt this or interfere with this. I have to go and return to my master Abraham. Do you have anything else you wanted to add to that? All right, thank you. So this second part then, how did God right Laban's wrongs toward Jacob, and how should this affect our faith?
Well, as you were mentioning, like with the speckled and the spotted and everything, God provided the blessings as Jacob was going along, and so and again it was something that Jacob wasn't making a big deal out of it. He was just following. This to me gives an idea of how Jacob's faith is growing as he's going through these trials and all this tribulation that's happening. The blessings that God's provided are enabling his faith to grow more and more. He's getting more and more examples of how following God now is beneficial. And so we're seeing now a change in his personality, which apparently God saw it too, because it was now time for him to go confront his brother.
What did God say to Laban? Because God communicated with Laban, remember? Laban's coming, and the night before, God speaks to him and says,
Speak bad or good to my servant Jacob.
yeah, you better not mess with it. If you got any kind of harm, you're thinking, you better not go there, right? And so God said to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, this is verse 24 of chapter 31, be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. So Laban overtakes Jacob, and he brings that up. Well, your Lord, your God spoke to me. So to kind of hold him back, you better be careful. You better be reserved in how you go about this. But how should that affect our faith? Number one, God's aware of what we go through in life. He's aware if people mistreat us, if people deal with us unjustly. God sees and He cares, and we need to keep doing what is right, because God's going to continue to bless the righteous, right? And in the end, even if our life is very difficult and a lot of trials, we know in the end what? A great reward, right, for the faithful. Let me go to question 8. How is it that Jacob and Laban are able to resolve their conflict? It's totally resolved and everybody's just hugging and, a lot of great feelings there. But it does get better. They what do? They make a covenant, don't they? And a witness between the two of them is the point of this covenant. And they made a heap of stones, and then they what? And this is what you see with when there's a covenant being made. This happened back with Abraham. You remember that vision he had, and God's making a covenant with him. And then when God made a covenant later with Israel at Mount Sinai, but it's something you see a lot. You even see it in the New Testament when Jesus made a covenant. What was involved in the covenant? There was still food. You think about the Passover, right? There's a Passover meal, but at the time of the Passover, he instituted the Lord's Supper, okay? To take this bread, this fruit of the vine, my blood. Here, they ate together when they made this covenant. And that's my point. When there's agreement and communing, what you find so often with a covenant between two people, or God and his people, is that there's a meal involved. And so they ate there on the heap of stones that they had piled up. They called upon the Lord to watch between them, and that neither would do harm to the other. But they make this covenant, and then they break off and go their separate ways. Okay. Why did Jacob call his camp Mahanaim? Mahanaim. Where are we at there with Mahanaim? Chapter 32, opening verses. So Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Mahanaim literally means what?
Two camps.
Two camps or double camp. So in the Walder material on page 94, so he called the place Mahanaim, two hosts or companies, because God's company of angels had joined Jacob's company of people. You got two hosts or two companies. Okay? And then question 10, what do you see in Jacob's prayer when Esau is coming that shows stronger faith? And so that also is here in chapter 32. That begins at verse 9 in your Bibles of Genesis 32, beginning in verse 9. He begins to address God in prayer. And as you look at his prayer, what are some things that stand out to you?
His attitude of humility, which is, again, something that wasn't immediately observable before.
Okay. Yeah, you see a reverence for God, you see humility, you see him giving praise and recognition. He speaks of his reliance and dependence upon God for deliverance, and he reminds God of his former promises and assurances when you look at that. And so notice in verse 7, so Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. What was he greatly afraid and distressed about? Nate, do you know why Jacob would have been greatly afraid and distressed? Who was coming?
His brother Esau.
His brother Esau. When was the last time he saw Esau? 20 years ago. That's how long he's been gone, 20 years. What did Esau want to do last time he saw him? Kill him. Esau he really wanted to kill his brother, hated him. So that's why Rebekah sent him away, right? To try to save his life from his brother. Now he's told by God, go back home. Well, Esau's coming. And he finds out Esau's coming with 400 men. And what's he do? He does what we should do when we're distressed and afraid. He pleads with God. He prays to God, right? And said, "O God of my father Abraham and the God of my father Isaac," this is verse 9 of chapter 32, "the Lord God who said to me," return, he's bringing up, "You told me to return to my country, right? Return to your country and to your family, and I'll deal well with you. I'm not worthy of the least of all the mercies of all the truth which you have shown your servant. That's what the humility Norm was referring to. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I've become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for a multitude. We see that. One of the things we talked about the benefits of prayer here, and then I used those lessons on the radio. It fosters within us a greater dependence and reliance upon God. And that's what we see in this prayer. He is pouring himself out and falling at the feet and mercy of God. Please deliver me from my brother. Remember what you said to me. You told me to go home. You said you're going to make my descendants a great nation. I know my brother wanted to kill me. And he's still thinking that's what he wants to do, and that's what's in his heart. He hadn't seen him in 2 decades, so he doesn't have any other information to go on at this point in time. Sam?
About his faith specifically, you just mentioned that he says in verse 12, like this is what you said, God, you would do for me.
Right.
And Jacob is almost, acknowledging that, he understands that God keeps his promises in that way. So, so I think the faith in God and his honesty is displayed there as well.
Maybe he's not quite the faith of his grandfather yet, like Abraham. But yes, hopefully that is a demonstration of his faith and trust, and this is what you said. And so not just like God needs a reminder, but maybe to feel better. This is what you said to me, Lord, and I'm going to put my trust and hope in that. All right? Okay. Just a little quick map work. You might not be able to see that. You might not have to go to the front row. I don't know. But if you have the book, you'll be able to find the maps. But I want to point out just some of the places that we have and we will be in this next lesson talking about. And so we don't know for sure, Bible scholars, archaeologists, where Mahanaim is, but we have a general idea. That's why we have a question mark here on our map, Mahanaim. It's believed for sure, though, to be north of the Jabbok River. This is where Jacob is. He sends the others over. At night, he wrestles with a man who is an angel of God. That happens right here around the Jabbok River. We have mentioned Succoth and Peniel. Those places are mentioned. Back here with Laban, we have Gilead, as we know it better. We're going to have the story of Shechem coming up with Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. So remember Shechem. And then with Esau, remember, here's where the Edomites dwell down here at the bottom of our map, Mount Seir down here. Enemies, of course, through the generations with Israel. But those are some of the key places right now. And of course, let's not forget the house of God. Bethel is brought up because Jacob is told to build an altar again at Bethel. And he tells his people, put away all your household gods. And they were all buried in the ground. Okay, so those are some of our key places in these last 2 lessons. Lesson 17, lesson 18 is Gilead, Mahanaim, the Jabbok River right now with the Esau coming and the Jacob wrestling with that man or angel. Succoth, Peniel, Shechem over here, Bethel, and then down here, of course, Esau, the Edomites, Mount Seir. Okay? So just a little quick map work there, geography class. All right, so Jacob's return to Canaan. And see where we want to be in our Bibles, Genesis 32, picking up with verse 22, then all the way to chapter 35 and verse 15. Good luck. All right. So, question 1. Why was Jacob's name changed to Israel? What happened?
Because he had striven with the angel and overcame.
Yeah, this is a kind of bizarre, peculiar, interesting story, right? When we read, beginning in verse 22, how he sends everyone over the brook, that's Jabbok that we just put on the map, right? They crossed over the ford of Jabbok. And here's Jacob left alone, and what happens? A man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. That's interesting. All night here, there's this wrestling going on. And the text kind of brings out this is not just some man that shows up in the camp and, hey, let's have a wrestling match. This is actually an angel of God. Now, angels came in the form of men. We've seen that back with Abraham and Lot, and here we have it with Jacob. Okay? And so as they're wrestling, and Jacob, so he's a fighter, right? He's been that way since the womb, holding on to his brother's foot, right? So he's wrestling, and he's giving this angel a tough time and wouldn't let go of him. And the angel said, let go of me. I'm not going to let go of you until you give me a blessing. He said, well, what's your name? Name's Jacob. I'm sure the angel knew that. Well, now your name's going to be Israel. Jacob, remember, meant supplanter. But Israel, he who strives with God. And that's what the text says, because you have struggled with God and prevailed. Not that he's more powerful than God, but we had this great name change, and he's going to be the father of many nations, right? Because the 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. And our second question is, well, in what sense did Jacob strive with God and prevail? What do you think? What did Jacob do earlier in this chapter that we just noted at the end of the last lesson? He'd striven with God in prayer, right? He'd striven with God in prayer, and he was heard. His prayer was heard. He overcame. He no longer needed to be afraid. Todd in his question said compared Genesis 28, 20 through 22. It's quite a comparison when you go back and look at that. And chapter 32, verses 9 through 12. Now, when you go back to Genesis 28, 20 through 22, what's going on there? Well, that's when he was made a vow at Bethel, right? He was fleeing his brother at this time. He had not yet come to Laban. He had not yet met Rachel. That's 29. But back here in chapter 28, Jacob made a vow saying, verse 20, if God will be with me. He didn't say, God, if you will be with me. Think about that. If God will be with me. It's almost like, let me work out this deal here. And keep me in this way that I'm going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on. God's going to give him much more than that. So that I come back to my father's house in peace. And of course, he had no idea that wouldn't be for 20 years later, because Rebekah said, let me send you away for a few days. That's what she said to her son. You think mom, who loved her son so much, didn't want to see him for 20 years? I'm going to send you away for a few days until your brother calms down, right? But he says here, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, if that happens. Then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I've set as a pillar shall be God's house. This is at Bethel, remember. And of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. So like he's working out some kind of deal or bargain with God. Well, how's that different from when we get to chapter 32 and what we read in verses 9 through 12 already? Big difference, really. Stark contrast, isn't it? And we see that his prayer in Genesis 32, as we already noted, showed his humility, it showed his reverence, it showed his praise to God, his dependence upon God. Big difference. And we see that growth then, right? We see that maturity from a lot of immaturity in his understanding and view of God to what we have now in chapter 32. Of course, we hope so. 20 years have passed. We hope there's some growth. Now, how should we do likewise? When I think of striving with God, but if this was a good thing with Jacob and the way we're looking at it, how is it a good thing for us to strive with God? In what ways would we do that, Nor?
This shows the growth of living on somebody else's faith to living on your own faith. And basically early in Jacob's life, he was living on the faith of his father. This was not his God, this was his father's God. This was the God of my grandfather and my father, but not mine. But if you do this, and you get all that's basically living on somebody else's faith. But he's grown into the point where now he has developed his own faith, and it's with that comes the humility, right. and that's the place we need to try to get to.
Humility is key, isn't it? In our relationship with God, a reverence for Him, a praise of Him. And he cites as an example Psalm 142, one of the great Psalms of David, when he's crying out to God, pleading for God's help and deliverance, and how everyone has left me, I have no one. So he's striving with God in prayer, and we can do that, right? In a reverent way, just pour our hearts out to God, crying out to God in prayer, pouring out, it says, I pour out my complaint, I declare to you my trouble. Well, man after God's own heart did that. Jacob's doing that, and we see it through many of the Psalms. It's okay to do that with humility and with reverence, pouring out our complaint, bringing, right? It says, what does it say? Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. Philippians 4:6. Casting all your anxieties upon Him, 1 Peter 5. Verse 7, knowing He cares for you. And so would that maybe involve, if I'm casting them upon Him, my pouring out my complaints before Him, giving it to Him? Yeah, why not?
There's an honesty about it too, where, I mean, you can't fool God. God reads our hearts, and there's an honesty about Jacob. You can tell where his faith is by what he's saying, and his relationship, and how he's approaching that relationship, and it's refreshing, because sometimes we try to deceive. We think we can deceive God, and maybe try to act humble, when in fact maybe we're not at that time, and so it's something that's refreshing about Jacob. He's a real person. You can tell.
All right. Number 2, what was Jacob expecting from Esau? 32 verse 8, we already read it earlier. Or he was afraid of him. Maybe we didn't read verse 8, but he was expecting what, Ken?
To be attacked by him.
Yeah, that's what he's expecting. He showed up 400 men, he's coming
To not only kill me, but all my household. And so that's what he's expecting. Esau to seek revenge on his brother for past wrongs done to him. But what does Esau do instead?
Right.
Esau ran to meet him, embraced him, fell on his neck, and kissed him, and they wept.
Does that remind you of
A
a
New Testament story at all? Can you not kind of automatically think of the father of the prodigal son? When the prodigal son came home, he ran to him, embraced him, fell on his neck, kissed him, wept, welcomed him home. Maybe we're not expecting, he had to be blown away. He was not expecting that at all. From being attacked to Esau running to him to embrace him, and just, that's, how wonderful that was. So what about Jacob's approach to reconciliation with his brother, and how can we apply the lesson? So already we noted, what did he do? When he was afraid and distressed, where did he go first? Went to God, right? So he prays to God about the matter. And then, before meeting Esau, what does he do?
What's the prayer work he does to hopefully soften Esau? Right?
Well, he has some of his wealth to offer.
Yeah, he sends a lot of gifts.
Ahead of time. So generosity, kindness, kill them with kindness, right? He's sending all these gifts on ahead of him. And then what does he himself do? We talked about his humility. How does he show humility toward Esau?
He bowed himself 7 times.
That's right. As he's approaching Esau, he bowed himself to the ground.
Ground 7 times. So praying to God, he's sending gifts, not just one, but a number of gifts to him. And Esau says, what do you mean by all this? And for you to have it. I want you to have it. I've been blessed, and I want to share those blessings with you by God. And then all the bowing that he does. And how can we apply the lesson? Well, there's times where we need to be reconciled to our brethren. We need to seek God's favor. We need humility. Doing acts of kindness to them certainly will help if there's tension or problems there, right? To try to appease and reach them and soften their heart. I mean, even the way we speak, the Bible says how a soft answer can turn away a wrath. But yeah, just a humble approach can do a lot, right? In softening people that are upset with us about a matter. Okay. Go ahead, Norm.
I've heard talk about plan for the worst and expect the best, and that's kind of the approach that God wants us to take. Do what we can do to the limit of what we can do, and leave the rest to God, and not test God and just say, "Oh, just leaving it up to you, Lord. You know, I know I should go out and work, but I'm just waiting here for those blessings to come down while I'm sitting on the TV." You know. He does everything he can do, and then leaves the rest to God. And that's great.
All right. Well said.
So, real quick, what happened to Dinah and Shechem? This is the one daughter that Jacob has by Leah. What happens there?
She was raped by Shechem.
Okay.
I guess the town must have been named after him, or he was named after the town.
It was. So when Shechem, the son of Hamor,
The Hivite, so we got some of the Canaanite people, right? Prince of the country. He sees Dinah, likes what he sees, takes her, text says lays with her, and violated her. Now, the follow-up question, is there any suggestion in the text that Dinah brought it upon herself? What did she do? She went out to see the daughters of the land, the text says, which would be the Canaanite people. Did she go out by herself? Did she have anybody with her? Doesn't say. The text doesn't specifically state. I know you just used the word rape. The text doesn't specifically state that she was forced or tried to resist, does it?
Does it?
Yeah.
Verse 2 of chapter 3.
He took her and lay with her by force.
Okay, that's what mine doesn't do. That's why I need that text.
Apologies.
So the New King James says he took her and lay with her and violated her. I guess something else, when he's wanting her as a wife, again, we don't have all the information, right? We don't, but it's nothing said about her protesting, I don't want this. He speaks kindly to her. He wants her obviously as his wife, as the follow-up question continues, right? He wants to have her as his wife, and he speaks kindly to her, wants to work something out. But your verse reads how again?
When Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force.
By force. That presents it much stronger than
What I have. All right, so Todd will pick up there with Dinah, questions 3 and 4.